sometimes the more simple rounded one, which we call the classical design, is easier to use with a finger one, but a lot of folks really like the Chartres design, and that's the more complicated one you see on the paper. So you can use whichever one you want. But one of the handouts that I sent you was a little paper that said, "What is a labyrinth?" This was a little piece that I developed a lot of years ago. It's kind of what I refer to as my elevator speech on labyrinths. Basically, that you can read it in full later if you haven't already, but basically what it tells you is that labyrinths are pathways large enough to walk usually, but now we see them in designs where you can use your finger in them, and we're going to do that in a little bit. But they're pathways that are large enough to walk. They look pretty complex, but there aren't any intersections, there aren't any dead ends in them. It's just one single path, and you follow that pathway all the way through until you come to the end or the center. And then to come back out, you simply retrace your step. They come in lots of different shapes and sizes. Christians have been using labyrinths. We know we can document for at least 1,600 years in our history, in our Christian history, but they've been in the world for a lot longer than that. Document somewhere between 4 and 6,000 years. So they've been around. They come in all shapes and sizes, as I said, and they get used for a whole lot of purposes, especially in the modern context. I've found in my own personal life that a regular ongoing practice of using labyrinths as part of my contemplative prayer life has really been a benefit in a lot of ways. Not only my own spiritual journey, my relationship with Jesus, but also ability to center myself and stay calm in a world that's full of stress and turmoil. And I realize none of us have experienced any stress this last year, right? So you don't need this. But if you do, labyrinth work can be a marvelous tool for healthfully moving through the stress in life. And as a Christian, it's a great tool for deepening your relationship with God, and we'll look at some of that. What I would like to do right off the bat, though, is show you a video. So I'm going to share my screen. It's about a 7-minute. It was really a PowerPoint presentation that I turned into a video talking about Labyrinth through the ages, and I wanted to try and get in a real concise way down a kind of expression of how and where we see labyrinths through the world, through the ages, in the Christian context, but also the more than Christian context. So I'm going to share my screen. There is some music background to it. I hope in the streaming it has worked in the past, so I hope it works well. But what I would invite you to do as you're here to watch this is to get in a good posture, a comfortable posture. Put your hands in a place that's comfortable. Check your breath. Are you breathing deeply and slowly as much as you're able? Do you have any stress in your body anywhere? And kind of check that and maybe tighten those muscles and then relax them. And then just sit back and continue to breathe deeply and quietly as you watch this video. So let me do something here first. Can you see that, everybody? Okay, here we go. Hold on a second. I want to do one thing. I'm going to back out for a second. I forgot to click the share sound. Okay, here we go. Okay. Do we have any questions before I go on about that presentation at all? Did you, anything in there that you wondered about or you noticed? Okay. I hope the big things that you saw were that, one, labyrinths are found all over the world. Historically, they show up on every continent of the world. They're in very different cultures across the globe, showing up at different points in time. A lot of the most ancient labyrinths that we know about, we don't really know originally what their purpose was. But one of the realities, the archetypes that crop up time and time again in the human experience throughout history is the notion of journeying as a human experience. And that means literal journeying, but also metaphorical journeying, spiritual journeying, emotional journeying. Humans are tuned into this notion that we make our way through the world, or we make our way along this pathway in a variety of ways. And that notion of journeying finds its way into spiritual experience in all sorts of religious traditions. If you think of just the times that we hear time and again in Scripture, the notion that we journey with Jesus, that there is this pathway or this path to Christianity. We find it in sermons that are preached when we talk about the way to be on our way through life. And so out of this notion of journeying as a human experience, then humans have found ways to express that symbolically. And it seems that labyrinths in one shape or form become this sort of archetypal symbol for human journeying or the human pathway. Even in Greek mythology, there is this notion of, there's one of the old Greek myths is of Theseus and the Minotaur. And the Minotaur is in the middle of this labyrinth. And of course, in that story, the labyrinth really is a maze. There's all sorts of dead ends and pathways. But in the middle of this labyrinth, there is this Minotaur that consumes people. And people are thrown in as punishment or just to appease the evil Minotaur. And it's kind of a way that the people in control keep civilization under their control. But Theseus comes along and goes into the labyrinth and kills the Minotaur. And part of how he does that is by the way of this secret, this magic thread that his lover gives to him. And so he takes that and, like leaving breadcrumbs, but he trails this magical thread behind him. He does in the Minotaur, and then he follows the magical thread back out. And so that often becomes, when you see Roman mosaic tiles of labyrinths, whether they're just in households as pieces of art or in civic places, you often will see a terrazzo or a mosaic symbol of the Minotaur, the monster, in the center of the design. And often there will be a little thread of stone winding its way through part of the labyrinth. And that's pretty common in the historical finds of ancient Roman tile labyrinths. Well, the Christian church comes along, and I mean Christian church at large, the Christian movement comes along. And from the get-go, Christians were really good about taking some tool, some design, some image, often from other cultures, and bringing it into the Christian tradition and just redefining it. The cross is a really good example. The cross is an executioner's device. And now for us, we've changed the meaning. And sure, there's that notion of sacrifice and servanthood, but we've redone the meaning. So for us, it becomes that deep, deep image of faithfulness. Well, early on in the church, we have found images of labyrinths in which there were minotaurs still in the center. and images of thread winding out the entrance. And some folks want to know, well, why is that? That's a non-Christian Greek mythological symbol. Well, what we think happened was that the Minotaur stopped being, for Christians, this part of Roman or Greek mythology, and it became a symbol for that which seeks to undo us in the world. Whether it's evil incarnate, whether it's the devil, whether it's just the stuff that we will face in our lives, in the center of our lives, that will undo us if we aren't careful or don't have someone who can help us back out of the labyrinth. And that little thread that often remains in those Christian labyrinths becomes not just a thread, but a symbol for that which guides us along the path, the Holy Spirit. And so Christians early on were taking these very Roman designs and not changing them a lot, but just redefining everything about the symbolism in them. Slowly through time, though, there was this evolution until we get to the 13th century France in this cathedral system, where these really elaborate labyrinths started cropping up in these Christian cathedrals, and they were being used for all sorts of purposes. Liturgical dances on High Holy Days, Easter and Christmas were used as part of the liturgy. There's a lot of stuff we don't know about them. A lot of the history is lost. But one of the things that has seemed to come to light is that it was in that day and age when one of the highest, most pious things you could do was to make a pilgrimage, a spiritual journey to the Holy Lands. Well, if you think about it, the only people that could do that were wealthy, landowning, male citizens and members of the church. It was because they were the folks that had enough money that they could leave behind folks to take care of their property. They had enough money that they could take an entourage with them to keep them safe. They had enough wherewithal to be gone for months, if not years on end, and then come back. And so this high pious thing you could do to show your Christian faithfulness was really only reserved for a very few people. Well, these labyrinths started going in, and the church then began to think about it and began to tell people, okay, if you can make a pilgrimage to your local cathedral once in your life, and you have to realize that a lot of people who would say, that's my cathedral, that church in Amiens or Chartres, that cathedral is the one that's my cathedral. They may live several days walk from that cathedral. And if they're poor enough, they can't just take time off to do that. You know, it's a very hard thing for them to do, even just a few days off to get to their local cathedral. And so a lot of people never actually made it to their cathedral in their lifetime. But the church said, if you can do that, if you can pilgrimage to your local cathedral and walk the labyrinth to the center, that counts in piety terms, that counts the same as if you traveled to the Holy Lands, to Jerusalem. And suddenly what labyrinth sort of became was this democratization of spirituality, this democratization of piety, because, you know, it may be very hard for some people to take 3-4 days off, but a lot of people, if they really wanted to, they could figure a way, and in their lifetime, they could do that. Women could do that. Men could do that. Children could do that. And so one of the things that we think labyrinths were used for was a way for the common people to be able to demonstrate faithfulness in the eyes of the church and God. Well, there was, for a long time, labyrinths kind of cropped out of popularity, and then they came in and they came out. And you may have seen in the history that one of those French labyrinths was actually destroyed by the canon priest of that cathedral. what we believe happened was that at that time, using the labyrinth became so popular that the canon priest became jealous of the labyrinth. It was more popular than he was. And of course, we don't have any church politics in our congregations, but in those French cathedrals, that priest didn't like the fact that the labyrinth was a more popular spiritual tool than the canon priest was. And so he had it destroyed. It was a beautiful labyrinth, and we can see drawings of it and stuff, but it's not there anymore. It went out of favor. It was probably, I don't know, I'm trying to think back, 20, 30 years ago, probably 30 years ago, that we started seeing labyrinths kind of emerge in North America as a tool. People were introducing them to churches and to retreat centers, but it was really kind of a novel thing. And a lot of labyrinths and labyrinth use got kind of relegated to the New Age movement. And a lot of people were real leery of them, especially in the church. As we learned more about them, we realized that no, they really weren't a New Age tool. They were actually, if anything, a Middle Age tool that we just brought back into favor. They were very, very old. They had long history within the Christian tradition. Since somewhere around 324, we know that churches have been using labyrinths. That early labyrinth that was in the little PowerPoint movie there is a labyrinth they found while excavating some ruins in North Africa, in Algiers, and it was in the center of what we would consider a sanctuary, a very small meeting room for Christians. It was in the center of it, and it was not a labyrinth that was really big enough to walk, but it was very big and very obvious and a very intentional central focal point for that space. And in the center of that labyrinth, in the acrostic, it translates as Holy Church, any way you read it, to remind us that the church is to be at the center of our journey through this world, in our lives, in our relationship with others, in our commerce. It is the Holy Church that becomes that place that we find how to be with God along the way of our lives. And so churches began to put them in, and retreat centers began to put them in. And we are now at a place where we have a pretty good understanding of how to use labyrinths, but we also have a clear notion that there's not just one way. Labyrinths have often been described as an open source archetype. That is to say, it's a symbol or an image or a metaphorical tool, that there's not just one way to use it. And so within the Christian tradition, it gives us great freedom to kind of invent ways to use it. And so it gets used for all sorts of things. I have a friend who designed a Stations of the Cross to be used on top of the labyrinth, where you walk the labyrinth and you stop at certain places to read those different Stations of the Cross. And it gets used a lot now in various times in Holy Week, not just in high church, but also in low Protestant disciples and Baptists and stuff. But within this broad range of all sorts of ways that people use labyrinths, there has been kind of one way that has emerged as sort of what I call Labyrinth 101, the kind of generic way that we use labyrinths as prayers. And you will see that on the handout that I sent you called Walking Labyrinths, and you'll see 4 stages there. And I want to run through these real quickly for you. As long as we remember that this isn't the only way to walk labyrinths, but if you've never walked labyrinths and you don't have a real sense of how do I want to do this, this is a great pattern that then you can kind of branch out from. But the best way to think of this is to think of labyrinth walking as prayer, but it's not the kind of prayer where we tell Jesus everything we want Jesus to know. It's not where the kind of prayer where we sit down at night and thank God for all the things that God's done for us, and tell God all the things we want God to do for us, that if God was really listening to us, God would have done it already. But since God wasn't listening to us, we have to remind God, that kind of prayer. It's the other part of the conversation. If prayer is a conversation or a relationship with God, this is the part of prayer where we quiet ourselves enough that we can begin to listen to what God might have to say. So it's that other side, and one's not bad or good, but I think it helps balance this overall relationship or conversation with God, if you will. And so there's kind of 4 stages that I want to lay out, and it's on that piece of paper. The first stage, and you'll see I've done I can never say this word right, mnemonic device. There's all 4 words start with R. That's just me. That's contrived. That's my language. If it doesn't work for you, change the language, okay? But the first stage is remembering. This is what you do before you go into the labyrinth, before you start walking, or before you put your finger down on the finger labyrinth and start moving. This is about setting intention. It's about being reminded why you're there in the first place. I think a good place to begin remembering why we're there, setting intention, is to start with gratitude. Being thankful for all of the blessings God has given us in life. That's a much different place to start than if you start with why everything's horrible and terrible and yucky. But it's about kind of setting your mind and your spirit, your emotions in a place that are more receptive. And I think starting with gratitude, even if you can find just one little tiny thing, starting with that gratitude is really helpful. But why are you here in the midst of that? What's your intention? Do you have a question to bring to God? Have you just had such a horribly stressful day that you just need a timeout, a holy Sabbath moment, if you will, a place to de-stress? Are you wrestling with something in your life? Did you just have a fight with a really good friend and it's kind of torn you apart a little bit? Why are you here? What do you want to bring to this time? When you've figured that out, we move to the next stage, and that's where we step onto the labyrinth until we actually get to the center. Now, remember, there's no intersections, there's no dead ends. It's one path, and different labyrinths have different ways that pathway winds around. But a way to think of it's one path that finds the longest way it can to get to the center. And this is where we begin to, this movement inward to the center is where we begin to let go of the things that are going to keep us from listening and hearing God or spirit. Because I don't know about you, but anytime I come to a prayerful occasion, there's always stuff going on in the back of my head, that monkey chatter. It's like coming to worship. And probably this never happens to any of you, but you come to worship and you sit down and you think about all those things you have to do after worship and that thing that you need to do tomorrow. And the preacher better not preach too long because I got a roast in the oven, got to get home and get that. Maybe you thinking about the argument you had with the kids on the way to church. All of that stuff is turning in there. And very often what happens to me, at least, is we start into that music and worship happens, and my spirit and mind haven't gotten there yet. I haven't gotten past all that distraction. And so this second step in this labyrinth walking is using that time from the entrance till the time you get to the center to begin to move past distraction. And you can do that in a lot of ways. I do that with breath work, breathing in and breathing out and focusing on my breath. And I have a little thing I say, and we're going to use that in just a minute with our labyrinth walk. I sometimes will just say a little short snippet of scripture or a piece of a song over and over again. Maybe it's a word I'm focusing on, and so I'll just keep working with this word as I breathe in and out. Hopefully with that breath work, that breathing in, that breathing out, checking in with your body of where you're holding the stress, you get to the center and you've moved past enough distraction that you've kind of settled into a rhythm of quietness and listening. And so now we come in the center of the labyrinth to that third phase, that receiving. This is a place where we can stay in the center as long or short as we like. We can stand, we can sit, we can lay down. But it's a time to just listen. God, if you have something for me in this moment, what would it be? And then we just kind of spiritually shut up long enough, hopefully let God get a word in edgewise, and be interested to see what comes. Well, if you're asking a question, what may come is a different question, a better question. If you're focusing on some feeling, you may hear in the back of your head the little spirit voice saying, you know, I've got a better way, a better emotion for you. How about, you know, heavens may open up and you may hear and see angel choirs singing to you. Most of the time, that's not what happens. A lot of time, what happens is nothing. The still small voice of God. Nothingness. Because a lot of time we chatter about telling God what we think and what we want from God, and what really God knows we need is nothing. We just need a moment to be with. We don't need any big answer. We don't need any deep philosophical solution. We just need the quiet presence in which we can rest and let go. And in the kind of world we live in, I truly believe that if that's what we get from the labyrinth walk, a spiritual timeout, a holy moment of Sabbath, where we begin to breathe deeper, we listen more deeply, and we sense a presence of God that has nothing less than simply for us to be with in those loving arms enfolding us. That's a miracle in this day and age and world, I think. So what is there to receive? Is there something significant? Is there something insightful? Or is it just a moment of rest? Holy, holy rest that puts you at ease so you can continue the journey through life. When you're ready to leave the center of the labyrinth, we come to that final step that I call resolve. As you leave the center and begin to follow that same path back outward to the entrance, this is a place of integration. This is a place where you ask, okay, so what now? How do I take what happened, what I learned, what I understood, what I gained, what I experienced in the center of the labyrinth? How do I take it back out with me so that when I step off the labyrinth and back into my real life, I can take that with me? However in such a small, tiny, or large, or significant, in whatever way I can, how does this become integrated into my life so that as I step off the labyrinth, I am not the same person who stepped onto the labyrinth? How do I become a good steward of the gift that God has given me on this prayerful walk today? That's that fourth stage. Now, we need to know that any of those four things can happen anywhere on the labyrinth. So we talk about them as steps and stages you do at certain times, but you may put your first step onto the labyrinth and have this amazing, insightful solution to something you were wrestling with. You may spend the whole time getting in, getting to the center, and walking back out, and never getting past the place where you're trying to move past distraction. That's okay. It all happens in its own way, and it's important to trust God in the process and to trust the labyrinth in the process. It's also important to know that you may have a really good experience walking the labyrinth one time, or it may be nothing special, but like most spiritual practices, the good stuff that happens in a cumulative experience, walking time and time again. Reading the Bible devotionally is not a one-time endeavor. It's a lifelong endeavor. It's a lifelong journey through Scripture. Using the labyrinth is a tool to use over and over again as you move deeper and deeper in relationship with God. So what I want to do now is, if you have your finger labyrinth, and if you don't, I'm going to share one on my screen, so you can use your screen. Let's see if I can do this here. Can you see that?
Warren, I'm getting about not quite half of it. There we go. There we go.
There you go. Yep. Okay. Yeah, I had to make it fit. So there you go. There's one. Try to use it up. So again, I want you to put your labyrinth in front of you on a desk or something solid, or if you're going to use the one on the screen, put your screen at a place where you can use it. Begin to settle in. We're going to use the index finger of your non-dominant hand as your pointer. Some people who have permanent or finger labyrinths have a little stylus, and you're welcome to use that too. Try using your non-dominant hand for this though, and begin to settle in. Begin to breathe. Before you start, as you breathe in, say to yourself in your mind, breathing in, God feeds my spirit. Because that's literally what's happening. As you breathe in air, the gift of oxygen is invading your body and your lungs and the very blood that courses through your system. It is feeding you and keeping you alive. It is a gift from God. But as you breathe in, so is this an opportunity to take in an awareness of God's presence. So breathing in, God feeds my spirit. And as you breathe out then, you say to yourself, breathing out, God cleanses my soul. Again, when we breathe out, our body is getting rid of all the bad air, all the toxic gases and air that can poison our system if we don't exhale it. Now, we can breathe in good oxygen, but if we just hold on to that, eventually it will kill us. Actually, eventually we can't do that and we'll open our mouth and breathe on our own. But the natural rhythm of our bodies is that we breathe in life-giving and we let go of that which could poison us. And so that becomes for us this metaphor for our spiritual lives that we do need to receive from God, but we also need to let go of the things that have no use for us or are detrimental. And so let your breath become that symbol. Breathing in, God feeds my spirit. Breathing out, God cleanses my soul. Breathing in, God feeds my spirit. Breathing out, God cleanses my soul. Now, as you begin to remind yourself of that and you breathe deeply, when you feel like your breath is at a place where it's slow and relaxed but deep, begin to take your index finger on that non-dominant hand and slowly move in through the pathway of the labyrinth. You'll want to keep breathing. Keep reminding yourself about the rhythm of life God gives to us. But you want to move slowly and mindfully with your finger as well. You don't want to rush the journey, because our faith, our life of spirit is not about the destination only. It is about embodying each step, savoring each place along the pathway as we move in. We are a people who too easily buy the lie that it is the destination only, and we forego the presence of God along the way. We want to get there, and we miss the blessings on the path ahead. So move slowly in toward the center. And as you do, begin to just count your blessings. Check your breath. When you get to the center eventually, just pull your hand off the labyrinth and put your hands in your lap and sit with your eyes closed, breathing deeply, and listen. Is there something for you in this place and this time? Something new? Is there a different way of seeing something that you've only been looking at in one way? Breathing in, God feeds my spirit. Breathing out, God cleanses my soul. Breathing in, God feeds my spirit. Breathing out, God cleanses my soul. When you're ready, go ahead and put your finger back up into the center and slowly begin to wind your way back out. Continue to breathe mindfully. Continue to listen. Notice the pathway where you're at. How is that a symbol of your life? How is that a symbol of your faith? How is this pathway that your finger is on a metaphor for your spiritual relationships with God and with other people and with the more than human world we live in? Do you notice something about the pathway that's insightful? Is there a feeling you're beginning to notice in your life? What will you do with that? Breathing in, breathing out. It is a rhythm of our body that reminds us that we are all people who need to receive and let go, to take in and give back to the world. It is a both and, not an either or. The pathway we are on has to be lived mindfully. Otherwise, our lives are mindless. As you come back out of the labyrinth and exit, go ahead and look up so I know we're ready. Look at your screen. That'll be the only way I know to know that you're there, ready to go. Does anybody still need the labyrinth up there on the monitor? You'll have to unmute and say yes if you do. Okay. So that's a finger labyrinth. It's a good tool. It is a tool that gets left in hospital waiting rooms and chapels. It is a tool that's shared with hospice patients and folks in assisted living and care facilities. It's a good tool to have around, but it's also something that doesn't quite take the place of if you have the opportunity to walk a large labyrinth. If you're interested in doing that and don't know where one is, David can probably show you my Well-Fed Spirit website. And on that website, there's a page of labyrinth resources. And one of those is a map that I've created, a virtual map of North America, the US and Canada, drilling down to each state and then urban areas within those states that has maps of where all the permanent labyrinths that are available to walk by the public can be found. And I know there are several in the Louisville area. And so if you want to try one, take that 4-stage walk with you on a handout and go visit the labyrinth and try it out. See if it's something you like. If you don't have a labyrinth anywhere, but you have a square block of sidewalk, set a plan before you so that you don't have to think about it, but maybe you walk 2 sides and then you're in the center. And you stand there for a bit restfully. And then when you're ready, you walk the next 2 sides to come out. It's easy as that. Journeying in a spiritual context is done in all sorts of places. You know, I hear people say, well, I don't always have to go to church. I can just go out and walk in nature, which is a great thing, but it's no substitute for being in worship, in church with a community. You can do this labyrinth practice anywhere, but labyrinths are specifically designed as sort of journeying sanctuaries, if you will, a place to move intentionally into holy Sabbath and prayer. It is a containment that is just perfect for this kind of work of listening to God, listening for God in the world. And there are lots of labyrinths out there to use. Someday when this whole COVID thing is over, maybe I'll come down and we'll show you how to lay down a masking tape labyrinth on your floor. In a couple hours, you can have a beautiful Chartres labyrinth to use for a day, and then you just pull up all the tape and you're done. It's
Warren,
kind of a fun thing.
Let me interrupt and tell you, because I did not tell you, but thanks to Lisa and Elizabeth and folks before my arrival, we do have one of the portable ones that
okay.
put out, and I wish that Lisa or Elizabeth would tell everyone about the opportunity that they are making for persons who desire to walk it.
Okay, well, that's cool. So you already have the tool.
Elizabeth, tell us. Hold on a second.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, on Saturday the 20th. We've added some more times because the times have filled up, but we've opened up.
Okay.
3 to 3:30 is now available, and we'll add more time as needed.
Okay, so we're at 6:30 right now. You all promised me an hour. We're at that, but I also don't want to get out of here without offering a time for questions.
Absolutely. Let's allow.
And I can be here for as long as you need me, but I don't want to not honor your time as well. So, do y'all have any questions?
Penny?
Penny?
Yes, I'm most familiar with garden mazes, and the way you described the labyrinth is as there's only one path, there's no dead end, no confusion. And I guess I was thinking, is the maze supposed to be life in all its complexity, and then the labyrinth is a definite journey toward God? And which came first in history, the garden maze or the maze or the labyrinth? Was one before the other?
We don't know. We know that in mythology, when they talk about labyrinths, they generally were talking about mazes. And in fact, in Europe, you'll often hear maze and labyrinth used back and forth for the same thing. But in the modern world, mostly mazes are meant to mean those things that have dead ends and intersections, and labyrinths are mostly meant to mean this unicursal design, this one path that doesn't have any of those. A good way for me to describe that is to say that labyrinths are meant to bring clarity. Mazes are meant to confuse. And one simple way to think of the maze is the mazes that they made for mice in science class, where you designed a maze and the goal was to test the learning capacity of the rodent. And so you'd send them through and they'd hit dead ends, but eventually they'd find the place where the cheese was. And then you keep doing it and you see how quickly they can learn how to avoid the dead ends. Well, you're measuring the confusion of a person, of a being, if you will. And your goal is to try and confuse that creature. Labyrinths, as the unicursal design, is to do exactly the opposite, help bring some clarity. There is some interesting brain science that helps us understand why a labyrinth does this. And one of the things is that our rational side, our problem-solving side of our brain, part of our brain, gets into this contained path, and we don't have to analytically figure, do I go left, do I go right, do I turn around? And so that part of our brain quiets down. And these other parts of our brain that are very often suppressed in our lives, that creativity side of our brain, that spiritual part of our brain, those ways of thinking, they're allowed to sort of bubble up. Now, that's a very simplistic way to describe it, but that's part of why labyrinths work. The other reason why I think they work so well for a North American audience is because most of our people, if you ask them to sit still and pray contemplatively and be quiet, they can't do that to save their souls. You start feeling that itch behind your ear and that pain in your shoulder, and you start moving around, and give yourself 5 or 10 minutes and you're going kind of bat crazy because you just can't sit still. Walking through a labyrinth gives our body something to do, and it distracts our body so that our mind can attend to that spiritual nature, that contemplative place of listening. And so it's sort of a way that we move without having to figure it out. We just go, and it helps prayer life. The other thing I would say about labyrinths is it is a metaphor. People always talk about, well, I thought I was almost to the center, and all of a sudden I took one turn and I'm way out at the edge again, away from the center. Well, that can be just a noticing about movement in a labyrinth, but it can also be a metaphor for, how is my life like that? How often do I feel like I'm really close to God and something happens and all of a sudden I'm kicked way out to the edges of my spiritual life? Especially walking with a group, you'll begin to notice rhythms where you're close to somebody and then you're far away. You look across the path and somebody's going in the exact opposite direction on the far side of the labyrinth. And we are reminded of how our walks are all different from each other, but we're all on the same path. You begin to notice those kind of teachings and metaphors on the labyrinth that can be really enriching. Especially when you're in community. Labyrinths are great to walk alone because you're there by yourself and it's this kind of solo spirituality and it's really feel good and powerful. And people will say, I'd rather do that than walk with a group of people. But life and church are not usually like being by yourself. This COVID time is an unnatural experience. Most of the time we are in community and we have to navigate around people. We are on the path together and it feels crowded. So here's a metaphor for you. When you're on the labyrinth as a community, when you're finally able to do that, notice the person who's walking slower than you. Because that never happens in church, right? Nobody's ever moving too slow in the life of the church for you, or too quickly. You have people that are moving too fast for you and you want them to slow down because we just can't move that fast in church. We are all moving at different rhythms, and it's okay for some people to move faster or slower. We just have to learn how to navigate around each other like a dance and let each of us have the journey that is our journey while we're also honoring everyone else. And that's what kind of stuff that Labyrinths can teach us. So, does anybody have any other questions or thoughts?
There's no substitute for actually walking one. And I'm so grateful that Lisa and Elizabeth have made for these times. You can go on the church website and see the sign up there, or call the church office, and we will make sure that you have time. This, of course, because of COVID, will be your own time. But it's a beautiful labyrinth, and I encourage you, if you've not had the opportunity to do it, try it. And try it several times. Okay, Warren, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for your presence in a late afternoon. And peace of Christ be with everyone. Warren, thank you so much.
Be with you all down there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Warren.
Thank you, Warren.
Appreciate it.
Take care. Be safe.